It's also a confirmation of what the church has proclaimed for millennia, that we are not made to be alone, but we are made for covenant.
Sociologist Dr. Brad Wilcox speaking at this year's Issues Etc. Making the Case conference.
So give today's young men and women the truth that they deserve. Pursue marriage, pursue it with intention, and pursue it in your 20s, when the window is widest and the possibilities most open. The road ahead, of course, is not easy, but it leads somewhere worth going, and you, 20-somethings here, were made for this journey.
You can watch and listen to Dr. Brad Wilcox making the case for 20-something marriage from the 2026 Making the Case conference. For a $250 gift by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to video and audio recordings of the entire conference. Learn more at issuesetc.org.
I think the fate of Christianity in Europe should be very, very sobering for Christians in America and make them realize that nothing can be taken for granted at this point.
What you actually can affirm for your child is you are baptized. You don't need to be defined by this gender dysphoria that's nagging at you and trying to get you to carve up your body and make all these changes. You are actually defined by what God says.
Union with the flesh of Jesus. There is nothing greater than that. And American evangelicalism cannot say that. It's a disembodied Christ. There's no Jesus in the water, Jesus in the Word, Jesus in your ear, Jesus in your mouth.
All of the Lutherans from the very beginning to the very end teach not only that good works are to be done, but even the necessity of good works.
Grocery clerks in Tennessee love listening to Issues Etc.
It is an evil ideology, some might even say diabolical, that refuses to go away. Even now in the 21st century, even given the track record of Marxism's trail of hundreds of millions of bodies, there are those who still flirt with Marxist ideology, believe it has simply not been done correctly yet. So how does the church respond to the ongoing existence of this evil ideology? Greetings and welcome to Issues Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for tuning us in live on this Monday afternoon, the 27th of July. Here in the first hour, we'll talk about Karl Marx's fascination with the devil and hell with Dr. Paul Kengor. Then in hour two, we'll begin a series on the Lord's Prayer with Pastor Brian Wolfmiller. Dr. Paul Kengor is Senior Director and Chief Academic Fellow for the Institute for Faith and Freedom and Professor of Political Science at Grove City College. He's author of several books, including The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. Dr. Kengor, welcome back.
Yeah, Todd, good to be with you. Thanks.
How do you explain the continued allure of Marxist ideologies, especially to younger Americans?
Well, Todd, people are badly misinformed about what it is. It's quite stunning to see, but it's something that I've studied for a long time. And I mean, I was in college. I was a senior the year that the Berlin Wall fell. So fall of 1989, my senior year, I graduated May of 1990. And I went on to graduate school to study communism, the fall of communism. And I slowly saw that although we had won the battle sort of on the battlefield, if you will, actually, I'd say that Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, Margaret Thatcher, Pope John Paul II, Václav Havel, Lech Walesa, the Cold War ended without a shot fired, really. So it was really just a glorious thing. But I saw very soon that in the classroom, we were going to lose this battle. And I started getting invitations from all over the country. I would speak for groups. I still do. Young America's Foundation, that's YAF.org, Intercollegiate Studies Institute. I was listed as a speaker to give talks with titles like Why Communism is Bad, right? And I would get these desperate emails from students begging me to come to their college and talk about communism because they weren't learning anything bad about communism. They were learning good things about communism. So I saw this develop over the years, and And I knew that we were going to come to a point where you had a majority of young people in particular, and kind of a breakthrough year in this I saw was the year 2010, when young people said they prefer, quote, socialism over capitalism. By that point, it was like 44 to 42% or something like that. We can talk about the difference between socialism, communism, Marxism, and so forth. And then they started voting that way. And now they're voting for people who are self-avowed socialists, democratic socialists. Some of them are Marxists. Some of them use Marxist rhetoric. And I'm not giving you a long answer here, but I'll just say one final thing. Surveys of these young people, they will often say, victims of communism and other groups have done surveys on this, they will say, okay, you say you like socialism, you say you like communism, how do you define communism? And they'll say, well, it's about loving one another, right? It's about sharing. It's about helping your neighbor. But people listening right now, go to Marxist.org online, open up, download a free copy of the Communist Manifesto, and type in the word share. See how often it comes up. Type in the word love. See how often it comes up. Type up the word neighbor. See how often it comes up. All right. And then type in words like violence, overthrow, criticize, criticism, abolish, abolition, revolution. That'll give you an idea of what this book is really about. And so what I found with young people as I speak around the country is they don't know what it is that they think they support. And as soon as you give them even a half-hour tutorial on it, just reading from this little book called The Communist Manifesto, which is about 50 to 60 pages long, and that's it, the scales fall from their eyes. And they're not dumb. They're smart. This generation of young people, they're smart as a whip, and they discern very quickly when they've been misled. So long answer, the problem is that they're not informed about communism and socialism as well, which makes it easier for them to think that they support it.
You define the goal of totalitarianism as the fundamental transformation of human nature via some sort of political, ideological, cultural upheaval. Why is that definition important to understand Marxism, both past and present?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of us shuddered when Barack Obama, on the eve of the 2008 election in Columbia, Missouri, said, we are about to fundamentally transform the United States of America. And the people behind him on stage just started, clapping like, woo, woo, woo. I'll never forget thinking, really? You want to fundamentally transform it? I mean, most people that run for office want to change things for the better, tinker with the things here and there, maybe adjust some tax rates, do some things with Social Security and healthcare. But first of all, you don't fundamentally transform something unless it's really, really messed up. That's what revolutionaries do. And that's, I'm not calling Obama a Marxist, although I wrote a book on Obama's mentor, Frank Marshall Davis. It's called The Communist, and Davis was an actual Communist Party USA member. But that notion of fundamentally transforming, that's what totalitarians do. It's what people who want to, and totalitarianism, it's a very basic definition. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote about this. Carl Friedrich wrote about this. It seeks to transform human nature. And Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the closing paragraph of the Communist Manifesto, everybody remembers the line, "Workers of the world unite, we have a world to win." But they called for the violent overthrow, right? The violent overthrow of everything that exists. They said communism represents the most radical rupture in traditional relations. They understood how radical their ideology was. And shame on the people who say that they like communism and don't even know what it says. I would tell people, just read the opening paragraphs and the closing paragraphs, pretty much give you all you need. But then again, look up those words, abolish, abolition of the family, ! They write in the Communist Manifesto. Abolition of all eternal truths and morality, religion, in the Communist Manifesto. It's a fundamentally transformative ideology. The American founders created a really good system here. It's one that needs adjusted from time to time, needs amended, over 2 dozen amendments to the Constitution over 200 some years. But it's not really something that I think we want to fundamentally transform. The people who are engaged in the projects of fundamental transformation are indeed the Marxist ideologues and revolutionaries.
What have conservatives failed to understand about Marxism?
Well, interestingly, in my book on Karl Marx, one of the books called The Devil and Karl Marx, Michael Knowles wrote the foreword, and he was the one that said this. So I got to give him credit for this. I remember reading the foreword, and I thought, oh, that's good. And he said, conservatives say that Marxism fails because it doesn't understand market forces, right? It fails to understand market forces. It fails to understand this or that or whatever. Conservatives fail to understand that it's an evil, atheistic, anti-Christian, anti-religion, militantly atheistic ideology that, again, seeks to fundamentally transform. I remember one of the reviews that I got about that book. It was in National Review. It was by a very young writer. He couldn't have been more than early 20s, and I think he was British. And he hammered me pretty good, Todd, for saying that, for the way I kind of took the gloves off in that book and kind of really went after Marxism and really kind of ridiculed the ideology and was super critical. And he was saying, you're not going to convince anybody from the Marxist side with that kind of rhetoric. And I'm like, well, at some point, we need to just come out and say, again, this isn't an ideology that's wrong because it gets private property wrong or it gets free markets wrong. This is an ideology that's wrong because it's pernicious, it's diabolical. And it comes from a man who actually wrote poetry and plays about the devil. Mark had a crazy fascination with Lucifer. So I think conservatives fail to understand just how evil it was, although 30 or 40 years ago, Ronald Reagan, Evil Empire's speech, he's quoting Whittaker Chambers, he's quoting C.S. Lewis, he's talking about screw tape, he's quoting Old Testament, New Testament. So there was a time when conservatives, at the height of the Cold War, understood that they were indeed dealing with, as Ronald Reagan described the Soviet Union at the time, the focus of evil in the modern world. So that's something that conservatives today, I think, need to recapture and understand again.
Dr. Paul Kengor is our guest. We're talking about Karl Marx's fascination with the devil and hell. When we come back, what connection did Marx himself have to the diabolical?
We're going to have to be vigilant on two different fronts. We're going to have to defend the truth about the human person, made in the image and likeness of God, created male and female, created for marriage. We're also going to have to defend our freedom to live according to those truths.
Dr. Ryan Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center and member of the White House Religious Liberty Commission, speaking at this year's Issues Etc. Making the Case conference.
Over and over again, we're going to see that we have to form the next generation of our students, of our children, our grandchildren to believe the truth, while also defending our freedom to live it out. And then the long game is reforming our civil laws to reflect the truth.
You can watch Ryan Anderson's presentation, Making the Case for Social Conservatism, from the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case conference. For a donation of $250 by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to watch an on-demand video stream and download audio recordings. Order online at issuesetc.org.
Solid, serious, substantive. You're listening to Issues Etc.
For nearly 140 years, the Lutheran Witness has taught the faith, defended it against error, and shown forth the great treasures of the Lutheran Church and biblical doctrine. We're continuing this legacy by publishing issues and articles that help you see the world from a Lutheran perspective and that teach biblical doctrine and show forth the treasures of God's Word. Visit our website to learn more and how to subscribe, witness.lcms.org. The Lutheran Witness, helping you interpret the world from a Lutheran perspective.
Hearing is taken for granted until you don't have it. It happens at all ages. Unfortunately, some are born deaf. Others lose it gradually. The end is the same, a world of silence. The Ephatha Lutheran Mission Society serves the deaf and hard of hearing domestically and internationally. They're the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted solely to the deaf of all ages. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.
Welcome back to Issues Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. We're talking about Marxism, Karl Marx, and his fascination with the devil and hell. Dr. Paul Kengor is our guest, author of The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. Before we get to Marx himself, you say that Marxism's failure is not merely a political or economic one. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, it fails to understand human nature. And one of the things that the American founders got so right was indeed their understanding of human nature. And you read the Federalist Papers, read the Constitution, the Declaration. Here we are, 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The Federalist Papers, authored by Madison, Jay, and Hamilton. Madison, Federalist 51, Federalist number 10. Creating a system of checks and balances and separation of powers. They try to constrain. John Adams had this interesting Latin term, the spectrumer agendo, as he called it, which was this idea that men in particular, and in this case we're talking about men, male of the species, right, that they're often attracted to politics for personal ambition, ego, to satisfy some longing for power. And so, as Madison said, you need to create a government that can control itself. Ambition must be taken to curtail ambition, to constrain ambition. So they understood that, as Madison said, men are not angels, right? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. So they didn't believe in the perfectibility of man. But utopians do, right? Utopians believe that you can have a heaven on earth. And Marx's rhetoric is filled with utopian rhetoric. So many of the communists use this kind of heaven on earth imagery and rhetoric, which was ironic, Todd, because they themselves were atheists. And the actual word utopia, the Greek, is altopos, which means no place. So the founders understood, and most normal people throughout time, in modern times, have understood that you can't have heaven on earth, you can only have heaven in heaven. But the Marxists engaged in this very utopian project, and to quote Russell Kirk, the kind of modern founding father of conservatism, conservatives don't believe in the perfectibility of man. They do believe in heaven, and they also believe that you can't have heaven on earth. They said you can. They believe that you could make a hell out of earth if you try to create a heaven on earth. And that's indeed what the totalitarians try to do through their transformation of human nature.
What connection did Karl Marx himself have to the diabolical?
Well, he was fascinated by Lucifer, and a number of his contemporaries were as well. Mikhail Bakunin, who wrote God and the State, 1871, that is a frightening book where the way that he attacks God, Jehovah, is just stunning. I mean, people look that up, God and the State, Mikhail Bakunin, and your jaw will hit your keyboard when when you read what this guy wrote. But Marx himself, well, I'll give you a couple quotes. So he wrote this one in 1837. So he was born May 5th, 1818. So he's still a teenager at this point. But he would continue writing like this into the 1840s, which was the decade that he wrote the Communist Manifesto. So Marx, 1837 poem, The Pale Maiden, quote, "Thus heaven I've forfeited. I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell." And in the case of Marx, at that point in time, Todd, he's moving away from the Christianity that he had embraced in his youth. So some might say, well, he's writing there as a writer would write. Maybe Edgar Allan Poe would write what he writes. Doesn't mean that he believes in it. But I think in Marx's case, that's pretty autobiographical, what he's saying there. Marx came from a Jewish family. had been baptized at age 5 by his father, his father converted to Christianity. He was confirmed as a young man, had confirmation. He was Lutheran. They grew up in an extremely Roman Catholic city in Germany called Trier, Trier, like Trier, which contains the great cathedral of Trier, which was founded by Helena, the mother of Constantine, Saint Helena. She's sainted in the Roman Catholic Church. Constantine is actually sainted, I think, in the Eastern Church or Eastern Orthodox, not the Roman Catholic Church. But that cathedral of Trier actually holds the holy robe of Jesus that Helena claimed to have found in a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, as well as a crown of thorns and other relics. Crown of thorns is in Notre Dame in Paris. She brought back the holy robe that the Roman soldiers cast lots for at the feet of Christ at the crucifixion. And it's held today in the Cathedral of Trier. Marx, in one of his diabolical plays called The Player, where the player is a violinist who's summing up in this frenetic summoning up the powers of darkness. The player is wearing the holy robe of Jesus as he's doing that. And here's a stanza from The Player, 1841, by Karl Marx. Quote, "Look now, my blood-dark sword shall stab unerringly within thy soul. The hellish vapors rise and fill the brain, till I go mad and my heart is utterly changed. See the sword, the prince of darkness, sold it to me. For he beats the time and gives the signs. Ever more boldly I play the dance of death." And this is a common theme in Marx's writings. The diabolical, the devil, Satan, hell, fire, flames, destruction. My friend Robert Orlando has a great new book called Karl Marx, The Divine Tragedy. And he talks about, in that book, he talks about Marx's fascination with Dante's La Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy. And he says, interestingly, Marx had no interest in Paradiso, paradise, Purgatorio, purgatory. His fixation was strictly on Inferno, on hell. You know, that's where Marx fixed his gaze. And for this man who had an ideology that was all about destruction, that's no surprise, because he was all about the dark side and taking down God, taking down absolutes, taking down moral absolutes, and fundamentally transforming.
So how central is Marx's personal rejection of God to understanding the origins and nature of Marxist theology? How do those two go together?
Yeah, well, in the sense of a complete revolution in human nature, abolition of religion, abolition of, and here again, these are words that are in the Communist Manifesto, all eternal truths, all eternal morality. So he needs to, and the Marxists all understood this, right? Lenin said in his famous 1920 speech to the Young Communist League, "What do we believe? What do we not believe?" Quote, "We do not believe in God." One of his contemporaries, Nikolai Bukharin, said, we must take on religion at the tip of the spear, the tip of the bayonet. Communism and religion are incompatible. Marx said this too. Engels said this as well, right? You cannot be a Christian and a communist. By the way, I should note here, Todd, that if for some people listening, a very common mistake among Christians is to read Acts 4:32, 4:37, and look at that, and think that, and I hear this all the time, especially around Easter and Lent, when this is read from the lectionary, and in a number of different churches. That's the passage that says here. I've got it right here in front of me. The community of believers was of one heart and mind, and no one claimed that any of his possessions was his own. This is the New Testament. This is Acts 4:32 to 4:35. But they had everything in common. With great power, the apostles bore witness to the resurrection of Jesus. Great favor was accorded them all. There was no needy person among them. For those who owned property or houses would sell them, bring the proceeds of the sale to the apostles, and they were distributed to each according to need. And Marx even takes that line and says, from each according to his abilities to each according to his need. But what's important to understand here is that this is not socialism. This is not communism. In fact, even Pope Francis, who was considered by a lot of Christians, a lot of Catholics, who were super critical of him, me too, I was as well, you would have a lot of, they would say, that Francis is a Marxist. Well, Francis said in 2013, quote, the Marxist ideology is wrong. And he said at Mass on Divine Mercy Sunday of the year 2021, when he was preaching on Acts 4:32, he said, quote, this is not communism. It is pure Christianity. And indeed, you see there that these early apostles had private ownership. And one of the things that the communists say, Marx and Engels said in the Communist Manifesto, quote, the entire communist theory may be summed up in a single sentence, abolition of private property. So they wanted to abolish private property too. So what the early apostles are doing there is, in the name of faith, of Christianity, of Christ, of love of Christ, they're coming together voluntarily on their own, not under fiat or at the threat of an atheistic government, and they're agreeing on their own to share some of their proceeds. If you read on after Acts 4:35, they still retain some of their stuff, and they agree to live in community and help one another as loving religious people, as loving Christian brothers and sisters. They're not talking about abolishing religion, abolishing the family, abolishing all morality, abolishing all tradition, and the violent overthrow of the present conditions. So just because Marx comes along 1,600, 1,800 years later and twists that verse doesn't mean that you're supposed to look at that and say, ooh, looks like the early Christians were communists. No, that's ludicrous. So it's a totally different thing. Sorry if that's a digression.
We're talking about Karl Marx's fascination with the devil and hell with Dr. Paul Kengor, Senior Director and Chief Academic Fellow for the Institute for Faith and Freedom and Professor of Political Science at Grove City College. We'll discuss the human cost of Marxist ideologies next.
Here's an easy way for you to help us contend for truth in an age of anti-truth. Subscribe to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Just type Issues Etc. in the YouTube search engine and click subscribe. For Apple and Spotify, type Issues Etc. in the search engine, hit follow, and leave us a 5-star review. Help us inform other podcast listeners by subscribing to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
Looking for high-quality church music settings? Look no further than Concordia Publishing House. We have award-winning settings for handbell, organ, piano, and choral groups, featuring a wide variety of options for the entire church year. Visit cph.org/music to find a great setting today.
Lutherans for Life applies God's Word, both His law and His gospel, to all the life issues: abortion, sexual purity, assisted suicide and euthanasia, and biotechnology. If you have any questions about LFL resources, or if you want to find out more about forming a life team or life chapter, or becoming a life advocate, contact Lutherans for Life at 888-364-LIFE or at info@lutheransforlife.org.
Is your child spending all day on a computer at school and at home without actually learning much? Research has shown that traditional methods of teaching with paper, books, and writing by hand are far more effective. Now may be the time for a change in your child's life. St. Paul's Lutheran School in Brookfield, Illinois offers a classical Christian education. Through our rigorous curriculum, they get more time to just be kids. St. Paul's Lutheran School in Brookfield, Illinois is now enrolling kindergarten through 12th grade. Visit spbrookfield.org. That's spbrookfield.org.
Contending for truth in an age of anti-truth. You're listening to Issues Etc.
It's about 60% of our curriculum that focuses on primary text, that is, on the scriptures themselves and on our Lutheran confessions. That is a steeping in the Word of God and in Christian doctrine. Dr. John Bruss, President and Associate Professor of Systematic Theology at Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
And here we prepare men, we give them the tools that they need throughout life, faithfully to proclaim the Word of God, both within the parishes of our synod, within their own communities, and out into the world. It's a life of service.
Learn about studying for the vocation of pastor at ctsfw.edu or by calling 1-800-481-2155. Forming servants in Jesus Christ who teach the faithful, reach the lost, and care for all. Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Welcome back. I'm Todd Wilkin. This Monday, the 27th of July, we're talking about Karl Marx and Marxism with Dr. Paul Kengor. This is difficult to calculate, but it is undeniable at the same time. What has been the human cost of Marxist ideologies?
Well, it's been enormously catastrophic, which shouldn't surprise anybody who actually reads the book. Every now and then you'll get some defender of Marx who says, "Oh, well, it's absurd to blame Marx for the gulags and the destruction." Really? I mean, if you actually read the book, go to the 10-point plan, which talks about even abolishing the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population across the countryside. I mean, they want to take your stuff. They want to forcibly redistribute you and where you live. And it's obviously going to take a government to do this. They want to abolish all your private property. I mean, you think you're not going to do that without force? And so it tended to attract the ideology, people who, like Marx, were greedy and obsessed with capital, right? They accuse everybody else of greed and being obsessed with capital. But these people, there's no St. Francis among any of these people, right? Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Fidel Castro. I mean, Castro dies, everybody in Cuba makes $100 to $200 a year, from doctors to teachers to surgeons to janitors to whoever. They don't own any private property. Castro dies, he's worth a couple $2 billion. It's pretty typical of what they do. And to get into power and hold power, they annihilate their enemies. They kill their enemies. Purges. There's usually a civil war that accompanies them coming into power, because obviously people are going to resist an ideology that tries to take away their private property, forcibly redistribute them, tries to ban their religion, puts them in jail for practicing faith. So you have the Bolsheviks take over October 1917. It's immediately followed by a civil war in Russia, 1918 to 21, where 7 million people are killed. Mao Zedong and the Chinese, World War II ends, Civil War, 1946 to 49, and then Mao and the communists win. Mao goes on to kill, whether through starvation, purges, cultural revolution, whatever, 60 to 70 million people. The number of people who died in the Soviet Union, as low as 20 million, to quote Solzhenitsyn, Robert Conquest, Alexander Yakovlev, who reported, quote, Stalin alone annihilated 60 to 70 million people. You just go from country to country. Pol Pot, Cambodia, 1975 to 78, about 3 to 4 years, 2 to 3 million people died out of a total population of 5 to 7 million. 30 to 40% of the country dead in 3 or 4 years. And this just goes on and on and on. In all, at least 100 million people dead from communist ideology from about 1917 to 79. And of course, that wasn't the end of it. North Korea, 2 to 3 million people starved to death in the late 1990s. So the wreckage still goes on. And yeah, it has been catastrophic.
With that undeniable track record of human destruction, is it mere ignorance that causes people to still advocate for these ideologies?
Well, yeah, I think it largely is among the typical, like, let's say, millennial in New York, sitting in a coffee shop in Manhattan on a cell phone, on a laptop, sipping their latte at Starbucks and says, yeah, communism is good, right? I mean, that person obviously doesn't know. Fidel Castro, surely after 30 to 40 years, realizes that the ideology is only enriching himself. I think, Todd, the reason is spiritual. It is, to quote from Divini Redemptoris, the December 1937 Catholic Church encyclical, I think it is a diabolical ideology. The church in that encyclical called it a satanic scourge orchestrated by the sons of darkness. I think there is a spiritual, supernatural explanation for this that suffices better than a purely secular or rational explanation, because rationally it doesn't make sense. I think there's something deeper and indeed diabolical.
Are there advocates of Marxist ideologies, and I'm thinking primarily people in academia, who do not view that track record of bloodshed as a failure or a tragedy, but as success?
Well, there's a lot of them who will say, and they say it often, I hear from them all the time, right? Well, it just hasn't been tried properly yet, right? And we, right, us folks who went to the graduate schools, we went to Columbia, we went to Ivy League graduate schools, we studied urban planning. We are democratic socialists. We know better. We're not greedy. We're not like that. And if you just give us the power, we will succeed. And if we fail, the problem will be not us and our ideology, but you and your greed, because you didn't give us enough of your money. You weren't taxed high enough. If you would just trust us, right, to quote Ronald Reagan in his Time for Choosing speech, October 27, 1964, the more that the plans fail, the more that the planners plan, right? We just need to plan more. We need to plan better. We'll get it right this time. We will. We will. Just watch. Just watch. And the problem here, Todd, is that if they could give us even one example, just one, where it worked, and point to that. I mean, if you're going to be a champion of the ideology, you got to be able to give us 100 examples, right? A dozen minimum. But if they could just give us one. Well, if you look at Venezuela, I mean, they're booming down there. I guess that's true. Yeah, Maduro and Chavez, look at Venezuela, man. They're a G7 country now. They're just booming. Wow. Okay, they got that one right. Maybe it will work. But they don't have any examples at all. But, the point about the true believer is the true believer believes, right? They never give up. As Ronald Reagan said, it's like a religious faith to them. Raymond Aron called it the opium of the intellectuals. Reagan said, Marxism, Leninism, that religion of theirs. So they never give up the faith. They cling to the faith. Just wait. Just wait. It will happen. It will happen.
Tell us about the systematic efforts that you document so carefully in your book to infiltrate U.S. churches, seminaries, and religious organizations by communism.
Oh, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, that is, the people who read my book, The Devil and Karl Marx, the one thing they come away with is, the stuff about Marx, his biographical stuff, chilling, all this stuff about the persecution of religion, horrible, absolutely couldn't believe it. But above all, right, and this is actually the longest section of the book, is on infiltration and manipulation and how they infiltrated churches. And what they did with the infiltration of churches is nothing short of astounding. And the way they did it in America, in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, the communists were just like, well, this is easy. We're totalitarians. We're going to take over that church. We're going to blow it up. We're going to take the priests. We're just going to cart these people off, send them off to Siberia, right? This is easy, right? No problem here. But in America, we have something called religious freedom. So in America, they had to slyly, furtively, secretly infiltrate the churches, and they would go in and say things like, "Hey, Acts 4:32, 4:35, right? Well, this is communism." And these kind of claims would have, and they knew these kind of claims would have great effect among sort of social justice Christians who are of the more liberal progressive stripe, who would be like, oh, yeah, I guess so. There were also a lot of good Christians who were very shrewd about this, and this will shock people. Woodrow Wilson, who was the progressive 5-point Calvinist, he tried to tell his fellow Democrats and progressives in the late 1910s, he said, these people are barbarians. This is a savage ideology. You cannot this is not progressivism. These people want to destroy your religion. Don't believe them. But you had too many people who were trusting. And as Manning Johnson, the ex-communist who left the party because of his Christian faith, said, the devil doth quote the scripture. He said communists were great examples of that. And they infiltrated a number of churches to great success, especially the mainline denominations. And they had their greatest success with the Episcopal Church, with what became Presbyterian Church USA, and the United Methodist Church, especially through the Reverend Harry Ward and his group, the Methodist Federation for Social Action. And their code words always, this is right out of their playbook, social justice, social justice, social justice, which in its original definition certainly doesn't mean Marxism or communism. But these guys would take those slogans and use them on their own in order to try to dupe gullible Christians. And unfortunately, they had a lot of success.
How does the spiritual warfare framework that you apply to classical Marxism extend to cultural Marxism?
Yeah, well, so the applying Marxism to culture was a project of Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, who wrote about cultural hegemony. It was a project of the Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse, Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Rudi Deuschke, the 1960s German radical, he was actually the guy that coined the phrase long march through the institutions. It's funny, if you Google cultural Marxism, this nasty little box will pop up calling it like an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory or something like that. But open up the actual Wikipedia page and start clicking the hyperlinks, and it'll take you to things like the Frankfurt School. And then when you open the Frankfurt School passage in Wikipedia, just type in the word culture or cultural, and the screen just lights up. Right? These guys talked about what they called the culture industry. If you go to People's World, which is the flagship publication of Communist Party USA, they have a call for what they call culture workers. So they're no longer interested in steel workers in Pittsburgh, my hometown, coal miners in West Virginia. Those guys all voted for Trump. They organize, and I've seen this every time I walk by, well, I won't name it, but every time I walk by a certain Starbucks, they organize outside places like that. They're no longer, the old Communist Party guy is no longer on the waiting outside the coal mine to try to organize those guys. He is trying to organize teachers and the teachers' unions, but they've applied their craft to culture. And if you go to People's World, if you go to the website of Communist Party USA, cpusa.org, you're much more likely to find them today talking about, quote unquote, gay rights, LGBTQ. First time I saw the acronym LGBTQIA+ was in People's World. I thought, what is that? What does that mean? These guys were preaching gay marriage, same-sex marriage, 10 years before Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton flipped on the issue in 2012. They're more often today doing identity politics, gender ideology, sexual stuff. They're not talking about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. They're talking about same-sex marriage and issues like that.
We're talking with Dr. Paul Kengor about Karl Marx's fascination with the devil and hell. He's author of the book, The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. We'll discuss how the Roman Catholic Church has softened its position in opposition to communism next.
The Church's music from the 2nd century. Shepherd The 6th century. The 12th century. The 16th century. The 21st century. The best of the church's music from the past 2,000 years. LutheranPublicRadio.org.
Your comprehensive source for information, teaching, and truth. You're listening to Issues Etc.
This is Pastor Matthew Harrison, President of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The LCMS operates the second largest parochial school system in the United States. What can you expect from a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod school? There's one race, the human race. And Jesus died for the sins of every man, woman, and child from every land and every nation. Life begins at conception. All life is precious from womb to tomb. And every student, parent, and teacher is created in the very image of God. There's right and wrong, and we know which is which from the Ten Commandments. There are only two sexes, male and female. He created them. Marriage is the lifelong union of one man and one woman. There's such a thing as objective, absolute truth, and it's found in the person and work of Jesus Christ and His Word. To find a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod school near you, visit lcms.org/schools.
We're talking about Karl Marx and Marxism with Dr. Paul Kengor. I'm Todd Wilkin. This is Issues Etc. The Roman Catholic Church, through several tenures of popes, has a really stellar track record in opposing communism. Think about John Paul II and Ratzinger as well. But to my sense, it's softened its position in opposition to communism of late. What do you think?
Well, it did under Pope Francis. And as I said, Pope Francis did condemn it. He said Marxist ideology is wrong. But I could tell you, Todd, as somebody who, this is what I study, I collect quotes right from popes and papal encyclicals on communism. The number of criticisms of communism made by Pope Francis, you can count on one hand. And actually probably just need 2 or 3 fingers. That would be about it. And if he was against communism, he wasn't very good about it, wasn't very clear about it. I can't say he was pro-communist, but he wasn't a very good anti-communist. And also, he didn't believe in liberation theology, but he came out of Argentina, that whole milieu, and following Pope Benedict XVI and John Paul II, he looks especially soft on communism after those guys. By the way, my latest book is about Pope Leo XIV, called American Pontiff. Leo XIV is very anti-communist as well. In fact, a lot of people don't realize this, but he's actually a Republican who voted repeatedly in the Republican primaries in the state of Illinois in the 2010s after he came back from Peru. But the Catholic Church's track record on communism is really unparalleled. It's extraordinary. And I'm a convert to Catholicism. And the first time I noticed this was I read Qui Pluribus, which was published by Pope Pius IX. And he was one of the longest serving popes ever, 1846 to 1878. In fact, so Catholics consider Peter to be the first pope. Other than Peter, he was the longest serving pope ever. And so that November 1846, that first encyclical began a 32-year pontificate. And Qui Pluribus was published 2 years before the Communist Manifesto was even published. And it just laid out just savage communism. Because at that point, communism was already, as Marx and Engels open up in the Communist Manifesto, right, was already seen as a threat. And they even note by the Pope in particular. There came all sorts of encyclicals after that. I quoted Divini Redemptoris by Pope Pius XI. That was 1937. Leo XIII had a whole bunch of statements. Rerum Novarum, which repeatedly criticizes socialism and communism. Leo XIII also did Quod Apostolici Muneris in December 1878, which is a terrific encyclical. Another big one, Quadragesimo Anno in 1931, which meant 40 years, 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. Quadragesimo Anno was by Pope Pius XI. That's the one that says one cannot be at the same time a Christian or a Catholic and a socialist. It says the two are incompatible. And it implores Christians that if they really want to help the poor, spread the wealth, help their neighbor, just do what Jesus did. Just follow the gospel. There's this great line, Todd, where the Pope says, do not connive at error in any way. It's WWJD, what would Jesus do? It's not WWMD, what would Marx do? Just do what Jesus would do. And then there's also my favorite, if people want to follow up on this, I highly recommend it. John Paul II's Centesimus Annus, published in May 1991 on the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, is a wonderful, really beautiful critique of not only Marxism, communism, socialism, but also Western materialism and excessive commercialism. So that, I think, is a really, really balanced encyclical. But as of late, at least the most recent Pope prior to Leo XIV, I'd say he softened at least his public position on communism, but never did anything formally in a formal statement or anything to suggest that the church had in any way changed its position on what the church in 1937 called the satanic scourge of communism.
You write that the newly evolved form of Marxism is so radical in its redefinition of human nature that even Karl Marx himself would blush and find it bewildering. What do you mean?
Yeah, especially on the cultural sexual stuff. And I mean, Marx was talking, this was an ideology where he's inspired by the Industrial Revolution of the 1840s. And by the way, I tell this all the time, Todd, to people who claim to be communists today. You know, the world that Marx described that motivated them, look out your window, dude. I mean, it's not 1840s France or Germany or England anymore, all right? So what the modern Marxists have done is they've taken the oppressed framework of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and they've applied it to new models of oppressor and oppressed on race, right? So you have race-based Marxism, critical race theory, where they simplistically and outrageously divide the world into two ethnicities, and that's all, black and white. Black person, oppressed. White person, oppressor. You have gender Marxists, the oppressor, male, the oppressed, female. It's one of the only cases where leftists believe in binary, right? They do this with, they do this with sexual issues as well. So today's Marxism, they're applying it to sexuality, gender, race, rather than to the factory floor or the farm. So it's an altogether different beast today, but they still cling to that oppressed versus oppressor framework. And what does it do? It divides. It quite literally divides. It divides people into camps. T. Wyatt, the MLK friend, said Martin Luther King Jr. would have never supported this because he didn't believe in dividing people into ethnic groups, right? Pitting one group against one another. But that's what they do. They put people into opposing, hostile, enemy camps. And you're either the good guy or the bad guy. And if you're in the oppressed category, they teach you through consciousness raising to hate your oppressor. You got to learn that you're oppressed and why the oppressor is doing this to you. So that involves a lot of indoctrination, especially at the education higher ed level. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of this rot has taken place.
Do you expect that there will ever be a definitive judgment of history on Marxism, where it will literally take its place in the dustbin of history and its disciple ideologies?
Well, it should. It should have already happened by now. But Karl Marx's favorite phrase was a quote from the Mephistopheles character, the devil, demon character, in Goethe's Faust, quote, "Everything that exists deserves to perish." That's what Marx said. Everything that exists deserves to perish. He wasn't saying love thy neighbor. Everything that exists deserves to perish. That type of ideology deserves to perish. And when you look at the people who perished under the ideology, that's even more reason for the ideology to be defunct. But, the true believer keeps believing, and Satan's place in this world, we are constantly, to quote Ephesians, right? We're not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, powers, the world rulers of the present darkness. That's going to go on until the very end of time, until Christ comes again and brings true peace into the world.
Dr. Paul Kengor is Senior Director and Chief Academic Fellow for the Institute for Faith and Freedom and Professor of Political Science at Grove City College. He's author of several books, including The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. You can purchase this book on the podcast page for this episode at issuesetc.org. Dr. Kengor, thank you very much.
Hey, sure thing, Todd.
After the top of the hour break, an Issues Etc. Encore, we'll begin a series on the Lord's Prayer with Pastor Brian Wolfmiller, author of Has American Christianity Failed? I'm Todd Wilkin. Stay with us.
Listen weekday afternoons to Pastor Todd Wilkin and guests on Issues Etc. Issues Etc. is a listener-supported program. Your financial support is vital for the continuation and expansion of this worldwide outreach. Our mailing address, Issues Etc., P.O. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. You can also donate at our website, issuesetc.org. Issues Etc. is a production of LPR, Lutheran Public Radio.
Criticism.
Thank God that it's 5:01 and the show is over.
Commendation.
I am not a Lutheran, but I regularly listen to Issues Etc. and thank you for putting this on the air.
Conundrum.
A Catholic friend has come to our LCMS church, and he said, "Why do you say very God, a very God?" And I couldn't think of a good answer.
The Issues Etc. comment line, 618-223-8382.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jay Krause, principal at Metro East Lutheran High School in Edwardsville, Illinois. Metro East Lutheran High School engages young adults in a Christ-centered environment, delivering academic excellence and spiritual growth to develop Christian leaders for tomorrow. We provide a Christ-centered alternative to public high schools. We're currently enrolling students for the 2026-2027 school year. Learn more at melhs.org, melhs.org.